Rome was not built in a day, nor was it defended by mere chance. The Roman Empire, stretching from the sands of Africa to the misty forests of Britain, from the Rhine to the deserts of the East, stood as one of the greatest military powers in history. At the heart of this empire stood its most formidable instrument of control, conquest, and stability, the Roman legion. The legion was not just an army unit, it was an institution, a symbol of Rome's discipline, innovation, and relentless drive. It was both sword and shield of the Republic, and later of the Empire. In this story, we uncover the structure and warfare of the Roman legions. We will trace their origins, examine their intricate organization, and see how their strategies shaped not only battles but the fate of entire civilizations. This is not merely military history. It is the tale of how disciplined men, bound by oath and driven by Rome's ambition, built an empire that still fascinates the world today. Part 1. The structure of the Roman legions. The Roman legion was more than a fighting force. It was a living machine, carefully crafted, deeply organized, and supported by an elaborate system of command, logistics, and tradition. To understand Rome's wars, one must first understand the internal structure of the legion itself. In the earliest days of Rome during the Republic, Rome's army was not yet the professional force that later dominated the Mediterranean. Military service was tied to land ownership. Citizens who could afford weapons and armor fought as soldiers, while poorer Romans supported the city in other ways. The army of those days resembled the phalanxes of Greece, tight formations of heavy infantry armed with spears and shields. But as Rome expanded, this model began to show weaknesses. The need for flexibility, mobility, and professional discipline demanded change. By the late Republic, thanks in part to reforms introduced by Gaius Marius around 107 BC, the legion transformed into a professional standing army. Soldiers no longer needed to be wealthy landowners. Instead, Rome began recruiting from the poorer classes, offering pay, equipment, and the promise of land or pensions upon retirement. This was the beginning of the Roman legion as history remembers it, a permanent, professional, and highly organized military body. A legion, at its core, typically consisted of about 5,000 men during the early imperial era. But these numbers could vary depending on the time period and the needs of the campaign. The soldiers of the legion were called legionaries. Each legionary was a Roman citizen, trained extensively in discipline, formation, fighting, and endurance. They carried the iconic rectangular shield, the scutum, and wore body armor such as the lorica, segmentata, or chainmail, depending on the era. Their weapons included the short sword, the gladius, and the javelin. The legion was divided into smaller units to maximize control and efficiency. At the highest sub-level stood the cohort. Each legion contained 10 cohorts. The first cohort was the most prestigious, composed of the best and most experienced soldiers. It carried the legion's standard, the aquila, or eagle, a sacred symbol never to be lost in battle. Losing the eagle was considered a catastrophic disgrace. Each cohort, except the first, contained 6 centuries. A century, despite its name, typically had about 80 men. It was commanded by a centurion, the backbone of Roman military discipline. Centurions were hardened veterans, known for their toughness, strict enforcement of discipline, and ability to lead in the chaos of battle. They carried distinctive armor and weapons, including a vine staff, a symbol of their authority, which they used liberally to enforce order. The first cohort was unique. It was larger and contained only 5 double-strength centuries, making it a powerhouse within the legion. At the head of all centurions stood the primus pilus, the senior centurion, who commanded enormous respect and held a place in the council of war with the legionist general. Above the centurions were the tribunes, young men often from noble families, serving as staff officers and gaining experience in military command. At the very top of the legion's hierarchy was the legatus, or legate, appointed by the Senate or the emperor. The legate commanded the legion and bore ultimate responsibility for its performance in the field. But the Roman legion was more than just fighting men. It carried with it engineers, surveyors, smiths, medics, and clerks. Roman armies could march into unknown lands and build fortified camps in a single night, complete with trenches, ramparts, and palisades. They carried tools as readily as weapons, understanding that order and fortification were as important as bravery. This blend of soldier and builder gave the legions an unmatched ability to operate independently in hostile territory. Every soldier swore an oath, the sacramentum, to obey the emperor and his officers and never desert. Discipline was enforced with brutal efficiency. Cowardice, desertion, or disobedience could result in execution. One infamous punishment was decimation, in which 1 out of every 10 men in a disgraced unit was chosen by lot and executed by his comrades. Harsh as it was, this system maintained cohesion and trust in the legion's ability to fight as one. The structure of the Roman legion, with its layers of command, its balance of flexibility and discipline, and its integration of support services, made it one of the most effective military organizations in history. It was not the size of the legions alone that gave Rome power, but the way they were structured to endure, adapt, and strike with precision. Part 2. The life of a legionary and the art of Roman warfare. To truly understand the power of Rome's legions, we must look beyond their organization and hierarchy. We must step into the sandals of the men who marched, fought, and bled for the empire. The life of a legionary was one of harsh discipline, unyielding endurance, and constant preparation for war. Yet it was also a life that promised glory, citizenship, and rewards for those who proved their loyalty to Rome. The recruitment of a legionary began with strict requirements. Only Roman citizens could enlist in the early Republic, though as the empire expanded, auxiliary forces drawn from conquered peoples would supplement them. A recruit had to be physically fit, able to carry heavy loads, and willing to endure long marches under the burning sun or the icy rains. Once accepted, training began immediately, and it was relentless. A Roman legionary trained not only to fight, but to march, build, and endure. Discipline was drilled into every man from dawn until dusk. Wooden swords were heavier than real ones, forcing recruits to build strength. Shields were carried until arms ached, spears thrown until accuracy was instinctive. Running in formation, digging trenches, and constructing camps were as important as wielding a sword. The Roman soldier was as much an engineer as he was a fighter, but perhaps the greatest strength of the legions was not the individual skill of each man, but the way they fought together. The art of Roman warfare relied on unity, precision, and discipline. Unlike their enemies, who often fought in disorganized charges or relied on personal heroics, the Romans fought as a single, coordinated machine. At the core of their tactics was the testudo formation, or tortoise. Soldiers locked their shields together, forming an almost impenetrable shell around the unit. Arrows and stones rained down harmlessly upon this moving fortress. With steady steps, the testudo advanced, closing the gap between themselves and the enemy. It was not fast, nor glamorous, but it was terrifyingly effective. Beyond the testudo, the manipular formation gave the Romans flexibility unmatched in their time. Soldiers were organized into small units that could move independently yet remain coordinated. This allowed the legion to adapt on the battlefield, responding to ambushes, terrain, and the shifting tides of combat. Each unit reinforced the other, like pieces of a living chessboard. A battle under Roman command was not a chaotic clash, but a carefully orchestrated performance. Trumpets and standards signaled maneuvers, centurions barked orders, and soldiers obeyed without hesitation. Fear was crushed by discipline, chaos replaced by calculation. To face a Roman legion was to face not just men, but an unstoppable system designed to grind down any opposition. Life on campaign was grueling. Soldiers carried their own gear, often over 80 pounds, including weapons, armor, rations, and tools. They were called muli Mariani, or Marius's mules, after the general who first demanded soldiers carry their own burdens. Every night after a long march, legionaries constructed fortified camps. Trenches were dug, palisades raised, and watchtowers built. This ensured security but also kept men disciplined. The Roman army left nothing to chance. Rations were simple but sustaining. Grain was the staple, ground into flour and baked into bread or porridge. Meat was rare, usually reserved for special occasions, but dried fruits, cheese, and vinegar, mixed with water, provided energy for the endless marches. Soldiers were not only expected to fight, but to survive in harsh conditions with minimal resources. Punishments in the legions were severe. Cowardice, disobedience, or desertion could mean death. The infamous punishment of decimation, where 1 in every 10 men of a disgraced unit was executed by his comrades, ensured that failure was feared more than the enemy. Yet rewards were equally powerful motivators. Successful soldiers earned land, money, and honor upon retirement. For many poor citizens, the legion was the only path to a better life. The Roman military system extended far beyond battles. War was a tool of expansion, and conquest brought wealth to Rome. Soldiers seized not just victory, but land, slaves, and treasure. Roads were built wherever legions marched, ensuring supply lines and communication across vast territories. These roads, still visible today, were arteries of the empire, binding together provinces from Britain to Syria. One of the most famous aspects of the legionary system was the eagle standard, the aquila, carried at the heart of each legion. The eagle was a symbol of Rome's power and honor. To lose it in battle was the greatest disgrace, and men would die to protect it. The standard-bearer, or aquilifer, was among the most respected and targeted men in the army. Enemies knew that if they could bring down the eagle, they could shatter the morale of an entire legion. Roman warfare was not just brute force, but also engineering brilliance. Siege warfare demonstrated this most clearly. The legions constructed towering siege engines, battering rams, and ballistae to break enemy defenses. They dug tunnels under walls, built ramps, and cut off supplies. The siege of Masada, where Roman soldiers built a massive ramp to storm a fortress atop a desert cliff, remains one of the most astonishing feats of military engineering in history. Naval warfare, though less central than land battles, also evolved under Roman command. Fleets of warships were built to challenge Carthage during the Punic Wars, transforming Rome from a land power into a Mediterranean superpower. Ships were equipped with the corvus, a boarding device that allowed Roman soldiers to fight on sea as they did on land, turning naval combat into infantry battles. The legacy of these tactics and disciplines extended far beyond Rome's fall. Modern armies still study Roman formations, logistics, and command structures. The emphasis on training, discipline, and adaptability set a standard for military excellence that endured through the centuries. Yet behind this grandeur was the reality of suffering. The life of a legionary was brutal. Men endured hunger, thirst, and exhaustion. They watched friends fall in battle, buried comrades along the road, and fought in foreign lands far from home. Letters from soldiers speak of longing for family, despair at endless campaigns, and the hope that one day they would return to Rome with honor. The legionary was both a hero and a tool, celebrated when victorious, forgotten when broken. The system cared less for the individual and more for the machine of conquest. This duality, glory and hardship, honor and suffering, defined the life of Rome's soldiers. And so, when we think of the legions, we must remember not just the victories, the formations, and the emperors who commanded them. We must also remember the men themselves. Ordinary citizens transformed into warriors who carried Rome on their shoulders. Their sweat built the empire, their blood defended its borders, and their discipline made it unstoppable. The life of a legionary and the art of Roman warfare reveal the truth. Rome did not conquer through chance or sheer numbers. Rome conquered because it created soldiers who were more than men. They were part of a machine, relentless, disciplined, and eternal. This is why the Roman legions remain the most iconic military force in history. Not because of individual heroes or legendary battles, but because of the system that forged ordinary men into the most feared warriors the world had ever seen. Part 3. Nero's Fall and the Legacy of the Fire. The Great Fire of Rome marked a decisive turning point in the reign of Emperor Nero. Before the disaster, his eccentricities and artistic ambitions could be tolerated as the quirks of a young ruler. After the fire, they became intolerable. Suspicion lingered like smoke over the empire, and no amount of rebuilding or public generosity could wash away the belief that Nero had betrayed his people. In the years that followed, Nero's focus shifted further from governance to self-indulgence. He declared himself not only a ruler but a performer, eager to prove his artistic genius on the stage and in the arena. He compelled senators and nobles to attend his performances, forcing the elite of Rome to sit in silence while their emperor sang, acted, and played instruments. Those who failed to applaud with sufficient enthusiasm risked his wrath. The emperor of Rome had become, in the eyes of many, little more than an entertainer drunk on his own vanity. While Nero played at being an artist, the empire strained under the weight of his policies. The reconstruction of Rome demanded vast sums of money. The construction of the Domus Aurea consumed more still. Taxes increased across the provinces, and resentment festered. Governors faced uprisings, and Rome's grip on its territories weakened. The empire, once stabilized under Augustus and strengthened under emperors like Claudius, now trembled under Nero's extravagance. The Senate, already wary of him, began to see Nero as a liability. Senators remembered the terror of the fire, the suspicion that he had lit it, and the cruelty of the Christian persecutions. They whispered of his incompetence, his arrogance, and his indifference to the suffering of his subjects. A ruler who could not command respect in times of crisis could not endure. Unrest exploded first in the provinces. In 68 AD, the governor of Gaul, Gaius Julius Vindex, rose in rebellion, calling for the end of Nero's rule. Although Vindex was defeated in battle, his revolt lit a spark that spread to Hispania, Africa, and beyond. The governor of Hispania, Tarraconensis, Servius Sulpicius, Galba declared himself emperor. With the backing of his legions, Rome had entered open rebellion. When news of Galba's challenge reached Rome, Nero panicked. The emperor who once strutted upon the stage now found himself alone, abandoned even by his allies. The Senate, sensing the shifting tides, turned against him. One by one, his guards and servants deserted. The Praetorian Guard, once sworn to defend him, declared their loyalty to Galba. Nero, the master of Rome, was suddenly powerless. In despair, Nero fled the city. He sought refuge in a villa on the outskirts of Rome, accompanied by only a handful of loyal freedmen. There, on June 9, 68 AD, faced with the certainty of execution, Nero chose to end his own life. According to tradition, his final words were, "What an artist dies in me." With his death, the Julio-Claudian dynasty, founded by Augustus a century earlier, came to an end. The empire plunged into chaos. Civil war erupted, and in a single year, 4 men would claim the imperial throne in rapid succession. The Year of the 4 Emperors was a direct consequence of Nero's failures. The Great Fire had not only scarred Rome's skyline, but also destabilized its political foundations, leaving the empire vulnerable to turmoil. Yet the memory of Nero endured, shaped by both hatred and fascination. For many Romans, he remained the villain who burned his own city and tortured its people. For Christians, he was the archetypal persecutor, the embodiment of evil itself. In the centuries that followed, Nero's name became synonymous with tyranny, extravagance, and cruelty. And yet, there were also whispers of another Nero, one who had once offered shelter to the homeless, reduced the price of grain, and rebuilt Rome with more durable and fire-resistant structures. Some historians of later generations argued that Nero's urban reforms were visionary, that he sought to make Rome safer and more beautiful. But this defense was drowned out by the louder, darker image of Nero as the emperor who fiddled while his city burned. The fire itself became a symbol far larger than the event. It was remembered not merely as a disaster of nature or accident, but as a test of Rome's leadership. Where Augustus had guided the city with patience and order, Nero had failed in the crucible of crisis. His reputation burned with the city, and though new emperors would rise and fall, his ghost haunted the imperial imagination. In the years after Nero's death, rumors spread that he had not truly died. Across the provinces, impostors appeared, claiming to be the emperor returned. These false Neros sparked uprisings and unrest, proving how deeply his presence lingered in the Roman mind. Even his enemies could not forget him. The Great Fire of Rome thus became more than a moment in history. It became a story about power, responsibility, and the fragile bond between ruler and people. Fire could be an accident, but the failure to respond to fire revealed the truth of character. Nero, in his obsession with art, performance, and glory, could not understand the anguish of his citizens. His failure was not simply that he may have caused the fire. His failure was that he allowed suspicion to consume trust, cruelty to overshadow mercy, and vanity to eclipse duty. Rome, however, endured. The city rose from its ashes, stronger in stone and design. Its streets widened, its buildings more secure. The empire outlived Nero, weathered the storms of civil war, and continued for centuries. The fire that seemed to threaten the end of Rome was, in truth, a rebirth. Yet the shadow of Nero lingered. His name was etched forever into the memory of the eternal city. The story of Nero and the Great Fire of Rome is not merely the tale of a disaster or of one man's downfall. It is the reminder of how fragile trust can be between ruler and people. An emperor's duty is to protect, to rebuild, and to give hope in times of despair. Nero gave some of this, but he gave it too little, too late, and always with the suspicion that it served himself rather than his subjects. When the flames devoured Rome, they also devoured the mask that Nero wore. The artist, the dreamer, the ruler, all were consumed, leaving only the truth of his legacy. A man who might have been remembered for vision, but was condemned for vanity. Rome rose again, but Nero's name was forever marked by fire.